Hi everyone, in some of my previous videos you may have noticed the occasional aerial photo. Most people assume these were taken with a drone, and while that's true for some of them, what if I told you that some shots, like this one, were actually taken handheld with my DSLR? Almost a decade ago, back in late 2013, I briefly had a job taking photos out of helicopters. This was done handheld out an open door, and when we needed to shoot straight down, the chopper would bank in a tight circle, tilting the doorway towards the earth to allow a clear shot. While flying to and from the locations, there was nothing stopping me taking shots for my own use, and of course that meant tiny trains and trams. Unfortunately, while the flying part of this job was pretty amazing, every other aspect of it sucked and I quit to pursue better conditions elsewhere. But I came away with some pretty interesting shots added to my collection. In this video, I'm going to go through the images I took on two separate flights around the Melbourne suburban area. We're going to explore what can be seen from these unusual perspectives, and I'll point out some things that have changed in the 10 years since these were taken. The first flight took off from Essendon Airport, travelled up to Craigieburn, then down past Footscray to Laverton before returning to Essendon. The second flight took off from a helipad in Fisherman's Bend, and ran in a rough anti-clockwise circle around the inner city. Let's take a look at the Essendon flight first. Shortly after takeoff, we get a couple of views of the Moonee Ponds Creek Viaduct, which carries the Albion-Jacana goods line as well as the northeast standard gauge to Sydney. Continuing north, we pass over the Jacana flyover, where the standard gauge jumps over the broad gauge suburban line to Craigieburn. That object on the right of the screen is the back of another photographer's camera. You can see that most of the broad gauge is still wooden sleepers here, but the standard gauge is all concrete. In this shot, we're directly over the flyover, and I'm looking straight down through the helicopter's skids. Now we're passing over beautiful broad meadows. You can see the two suburban platforms on the left, as well as the standard gauge platform on the right, which was still pretty new at the time. Note the big mud hole on the standard gauge. Just beyond Broady, we see our first trains in the form of a Comenge and a Siemens in the stabling siding. We then pass over Coolaroo Station, which was only 3 years old when this photo was taken. This flight was on a Sunday, which explains the almost empty commuter car park, and we can see a Siemens train on the up line heading towards the city. Continuing along the Craigieburn line, we come to Somerton, where you can see the disused branch line which once connected this line to Upfield. A pair of V-Line Sprinter rail cars can be seen running through Roxburgh Park Station, and they would be heading to Seymour. Here's a really wide view looking back over Roxburgh Park and Somerton, and you can see some of the many industrial sidings that exist in this area. Now we've made it to the end of the suburban line at Craigieburn, and there's a lot to see here. We've caught up with a northbound standard gauge freight train led by a pair of CFCLA CF class locos. There's a Comenge sitting in the platform preparing to return to the city. We also get a great view of the Craigieburn workshops, and I can see a total of 11 6-car Comenge sets out in the open, as well as, if you look very carefully and I absolutely push the resolution out the window, a single Hitachi set, which was right at the end of its service life but not yet withdrawn. Heading back south, we overtake a Comenge heading back to the city, and then swinging around the other way, we get a great view out east towards the Yarra Ranges, and in the foreground, Upfield Station, where a single Siemens set is stabled. You can see the remains of the line towards Somerton and where the sidings once went into the Ford factory. Back over Broadmeadows, we get a better view of the trains stabled there from a number of angles. Then over Broady Station, where a down Siemens is just departing. Flying over Jacana, we get a good view of the station this time, with the goods lines branching off to the right, and on the left you can see where the Metropolitan Ring Road tunnels go underneath. Our last glimpse of the Craigieburn line is of Glenroy, which was a pretty unremarkable shot at the time, but is now changed completely with the line sunk into a concrete trench here. In our next shot, we can see the entirety of the Flemington Racecourse line. The racecourse itself is on the right, with the Melbourne Showgrounds on the left. A couple of X-Traps and a Comenge can be seen stabled at the terminus. Then further along we can see Showground Station. Then the junction with the Craigieburn line is just over here behind the historic substation at Newmarket. And if we dive in stupidly far, I can see a Siemens set running on the main line. In the far background, we can see the big sweeping curve on the Upfield line as it passes through Royal Park. The helicopter is now approaching Footscray, and we have a great view over to the CBD. Down here is the Maribyrnong River, and you can clearly see the regional rail link under construction, which was still about 18 months away from opening at this stage. We can also see North and South Dynon with a variety of diesel locomotives in attendance. Look, there's X31. Here we get a great view of the newly constructed RRL flyover, and you can clearly see where the Werribee line was slewed to pass underneath. Now we see Footscray Station, which is a big construction mess. A new pair of platforms are being built, which will become the newly aligned Sunbury line, while the RRL will take over its former platforms. You can also see the entrance to the Bunbury Street Tunnel there, which is used by freights and standard gauge passenger trains to dive under Footscray and over towards Dynon. A little further on we can see the other end of the tunnel where the line passes over the Maribyrnong, and most Victorian rail fans will know exactly what this is. We can also see the Motive Power Centre with several NR class present. And here's just a nice view over the docks towards the city, no trains involved at all, except for this pair of 81 class on a grain train, and we can also see a bunch of ships. Next up we come to Newport, and there's a great view out over the railway workshops to the bay. Just this side of the station is a 3-car Siemens in the Williamstown shuttle sidings, and we get a good view into the neck of the workshops. We now fly over Guninan's Spotswood maintenance facility. As usual, there are numerous NR class present, and I can see 2 special liveries. There's a loco painted for the Southern Spirit, I think it's NR 84, and there's also the old blue version of the Indian Pacific scheme. Over on the other side I can see one of the short-lived XRB class locos, which are a cabless B unit version of the XR class. I believe they're all in storage now. Here we get a better view of Newport workshops. There's obviously loads of stuff to spot here, but I'm going to point out a few interesting things. I can see 2 G-Class, one in SCT colours and one in Packnat livery. There's a ComEng trailer car that seems to have been split from the rest of its set. There are quite a lot of V-Line Z cars sitting around, and that's because around this time a lot of them were temporarily withdrawn due to cracks in their bogies, so these will be ones awaiting repair. There's a pretty trashed looking Hitachi set here. There's all manner of stuff sitting in the front of East Block as usual. And over here at West Block we can see the heritage area with a lot of steam rail and 707 operations rolling stock sitting about, including a number of T and Y class diesels. T413 is sitting there with some of the ex-Vinelander sleeping cars. Next we get a view over the oil refinery and out to Altona. You can see Altona Junction there with the main Werribee line heading off to the bottom right, and there's Paisley Station, which closed in 1985. We're now heading over towards Altona, and you can see the Altona line meandering across the coastal marshes there, and you can see the bright pink pig face flowers everywhere. This is Westona Station, and there's a down ComEng in the platform waiting for a cross. The second set has advertising on the side of the M cars during the brief period where ads were allowed to be put over the windows. We now get this slightly wonky shot showing most of Altona, and if we zoom in we can see Westona down the bottom, Altona in the middle, and Seaholme in the far distance. We then swing around past Laverton, and then over past the Laverton SCT depot, and then that other intermodal terminal, which I think was being used by QR National back then. Then we're back over Guinan and Spotswood, where some of the locos have moved since our last pass, and a second Indian Pacific unit has appeared. We also get a slightly better view of the XRB. Continuing back towards the city, we pass over Spotswood Station and get a good view over the docks. There's Seddon, and back over Footscray. This time we're looking out along the Sunbury line towards Middle Footscray, and once again you can see the realignment taking place for the RRL. And then finally on this flight we get this long view out along Tottenham Yard towards Sunshine, and you can see the newly rebuilt West Footscray Station down the bottom. So our second flight takes off from Fisherman's Bend, and here we have a view over towards the Westgate Bridge with Williamstown in the distance. Slicing through the middle of this image is the former railway line to Webb Dock, which was only used for 6 years in the late 80s and early 90s, but is still fairly intact today. Down the bottom here, this building proclaims to be Australian home of the 777, which is a bit of an odd thing to say about a place with no runway, but I believe it's a Boeing research and development facility. We're now heading over towards Port Melbourne, and we can see Prince's Pier, or what's left of it, and Station Pier, which were both served by rail in the past. The Spirit of Tasmania is in town, which of course has only just become historic as of 2023 as it now departs from Geelong. Looking to the left slightly, we can see the Port Melbourne Station building, which still exists despite this line being converted to a tram line in the late 80s. There's a C-Class tram in the terminus, and another one waiting to enter the single track. It's Kind of nuts they still haven't built a second platform here. Here we're looking down onto the remains of Prince's Pier, which seems to be missing something. And here's Station Pier, where you can still make out a few bits of track. Now this has got to be one of my favourite shots. We're coming over St Kilda and we're looking past the pilot's ear down towards Luna Park. You can see the Great Scenic Railway, which is the world's second oldest operating roller coaster. It was 101 years old at the time of this photo. You can also see a Plinth W-class tram in amongst the rides. Over here are a couple of D2 class trams on Route 96, which were displaced from this line by a new E-class not long after this photo was taken. Moving north, we get a view of St Kilda Junction with a couple of D1s and a Z-class present. Then we head past South Yarra Station. No trains, but I can see a Z-class tram on Toorak Road. We get this great view looking southeast and I can see a Siemens on the up through line, which would be an up Frankston train. Then we can see all the way up to Hawkesburn and Toorak in the distance. Now we pass over the Yarra River, and this was very well timed with a 3-car velocity right in the middle of Cremorne Bridge on an up to Ralgan service. And in the background we can see a Z-class on Church Street Bridge. Zs don't run on Route 78 anymore, it's all As now. We're now coming up to Richmond Station, which you can see in the bottom left, and there are 3 trains visible, all different types. There's a Siemens on a down Sandringham, an X-Trap on the up Burnley local, and a Comenge on the up Caulfield local, which will be holding up that velocity we saw a moment ago. And here's a lovely clear shot of Richmond with that Comenge just departing towards Flinders Street. From this angle we can see East Richmond, as well as tram route 70 running along Swan Street, with an A and B class visible. Note how those 3 trains have only moved a short distance since the first view of this spot, which gives some idea of the speed of the aircraft at this point. We're now continuing north onto the first bit of the Hurstbridge and Mernda lines, and in this view you can see West Richmond Station, as well as a little gap between the 2 tunnels there. This is North Richmond, and if we zoom in to the entrance of Victoria Street, you can see the Victoria Street Gateway was still under construction, with a C-class tram passing through the worksite. In the distance we can see the Carlton United Brewery and the Yarra River. For our final view of this line, we are looking north to Collingwood and Victoria Park, with the Yarra and the Eastern Freeway in the background. There are some Extrapolis sets stabled at Vic Park, and a Comenge is departing on the up. Comenges were still fairly common on the Clifton Hill group back then. We're now swinging around to the other side of the CBD and get this view across to North Melbourne and the docks. Looking down towards V-Line's Dudley Street Yard, we can see several N-class, including one in the old Blood and Bone livery. And over here is a 3-car N-set, which would normally be extended by a Z-car or 2, but as I mentioned earlier, a lot of them were out of service with bogey issues at this time. Now we get this great view out towards Spion Cop, Dynon and Macaulay, and you can see all the way out to Footscray and Flemington in the distance. You can clearly see the RRL being constructed all through here. There's an Horizon container train shunting at North Dynon, and lots of stabled velocities and Comenges. Looking straight down on North Melbourne, we can see a couple of Comenge sets and a Velocity, which will be banished to the RRL in a few years' time. And you can see the new dual gauge track work going in on the ramp up to the flyover. Over here we can see some Metro Works trains, back when they were operating them themselves with locos hired from CFCLA. There's a B-class coupled to IEV 102, the old overhead inspection car which has since been replaced. It was very rare to see a B-class running with the IEV, I think it might have only happened once, so I'm not sure if that's what's happening here or if they've just been stabled together. There are also a pair of T-class there, one with a crew standing nearby. And up here is a rake of ballast wagons. Now we get this great view over the sort of greater Dynon area. Down here is South Dynon Locomotive Depot, and this is the broad gauge turntable, where we can see a bunch of locos in Freight Australia Green, including 3 A-class, which I think were already in storage awaiting scrapping at that time. And there's a bunch of hood locos there too. Some of them are Ys, but there might be some Ps and Ts as well. Over here we can see some V-Line H sets, one with an N-class on point and the other with push-pull P-classes. Over there is an RL and an 80 class, I think. There's also a pair of old Western Australian K-class diesels which were stored there for many years. Actually, it might be there still. There's all sorts of stuff over here, including a few DLs and a PACNAT S-class. Pretty sure that's S306, which is now in the care of 707 operations. And over there you can see a loaded steel train. In this shot we're looking straight down at North Melbourne Balloon Loop, which was demolished fairly recently, and back in the steam era this was the location of North Melbourne Locomotive Depot. There's another H set stabled there with push-pull P-class. Over here you can see the crane where they used to transship the steel loading between broad and standard gauge trains, and you can see some steel coils sitting on the ground there. And here's a really interesting detail that I only spotted while putting this video together. That's tramway special work being put together, and it wasn't too hard to work out where it was headed based on that geometry. Those are replacement points for the 2 entries to Essendon tram depot, which had some track renewal done around this time. Now we're looking back towards Kensington and Macaulay, and if you watched my Kensington grain train video, this view is pretty much the diagram I used in that. So looking down at the arrivals yard, we can see a bunch of stabled velocities in a few different liveries, and note there are still some 2-car sets there, which were later all expanded to 3 cars. If we go up to the Macaulay Maintenance Centre, we can see 3 Hitachi sets, which had only just been withdrawn at the time but sat here for another few years after this. I photographed the last one being transferred to Newport about 2 years later. If we go over here, there's a mixed velocity set on the main line, probably an up Bendigo or Ballarat, and under the freeway there's an N-class and N-set sneaking along on the high-level suburban lines, probably an up Shepparton. Up here we can see the Kensington flour mill, and if we zoom in stupidly close, there's a G-class sitting there on a rake of grain hoppers. That's back when Pacific National ran the train. And down here, that Horizon intermodal train is still shunting. We get a bit more of a side-on view of Dynon here, which gives us a different view of the broad gauge turntable. And if we look back over here, we can see a bit more of the locos in this area. There's a Y-class there in V-line Tangerine, not sure which one that is. This DL is still carrying the green and yellow Australian national colours. I believe that's DL48, which somehow managed to avoid a repaint well beyond every other member of its class. Now we're heading over towards the docks, and there are a few container trains and a grain train sitting down there. That's Appleton Dock. There are a pair of Packnet T-class down there, which I guess must have been on shunting duties. And then finally, as we come back to Fisherman's Bend, we get a few more views of the Webb dock line. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this little insight into what was going on in Melbourne in December 2013. It was certainly an amazing privilege to be able to take these photos, and not something I'm likely to repeat anytime soon. Thanks for watching.